If you had to pick from the topics of death, sex, and money, what would you feel most comfortable talking about? The reality is most people actually probably feel more comfortable talking about sex than they do about money or about death. Two topics that are really very important for us to continue to have conversations around and not just wait until there is a need that occurs for us to address the important topics around them. Today, I am joined by a dear and wonderful friend of mine who we haven't just met on the internet. We are friends in person and partners in crime occasionally when it comes to our joint clients. Brenna Galvin, who is an elder law attorney and a death doula. You'll find out more about what the latter part means if you have no idea what a death doula is. If you know what a birth doula is, you can probably put two and two together to realize what a death doula is. But the reason why I absolutely adore Brenna is because she leads with her heart. Many individuals in her industry could easily just process the paperwork that's necessary for you to handle the legal side of any estate planning situation you might be in. And then say, see you later whenever, you're getting close to death and you need to talk again. Brenna really builds in resources to serve families and advocates for individuals to all have the ability and access to the estate planning needs that they might have. So tune in as we start to talk about the taboo topics of death and money, but also how to have those conversations. This isn't a podcast where we tell you what legal documents we need to have. Instead, it's about how do we start the conversations to discover what we need to have. When you have those documents, how do you have those tough conversations with the loved ones you're responsible for caring for? And how do you take care of yourself as a caregiver to make sure that you don't fall into a spin that so many caregivers do, which is then needing somebody to care for them because they are exhausted from everything? What are the basics that you need to put in to have critical conversations and care for yourself and the ones around you? So tune into this episode as Brenna and I make these difficult conversations a little bit easier for you to have. Brenna.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
I'm really good. It's like we didn't spend the last 25 minutes, bullshitting our whole lives or spending time therapeuticing. I hope Dave includes this in the podcast. Anyone who's tuning into this episode of the Thrive Forward podcast, you're going to get lots of fun from my friend Brenna and I. Yeah. We like to talk about money and death and dying and really we like to talk about lots of other fun things too, but this is what we're going to chat with you about today. How are you, Brenna?
I'm doing okay. It's St. Patrick's Day, one of the high holidays in the Galvin family.
Rocking my Irish wear today as well.
Yeah. So we're excited. And it's really fitting that we're talking about money and death because my Irish papa passed away in early December. And this was his favorite day to go do things in the community with his friends and bring corned beef and cabbage to everyone he knew. So this is a perfect way to celebrate him by end the holiday by talking to you about money and death. We'll channel our inner Papa Galvin as we have this conversation because, death and heavy topics like this sometimes aren't as fun for individuals, but I find that you and I really do find some sort of joy in being able to help people realize the life that they want to leave and the legacy like your dad has left for you and your sister and grandchildren and mom and all of the people close to him. I think we can channel some of that. What are the things that people can decide now while they're living to seize the day in their life, whether it's corned beef and cabbage, which I told Jim this morning, I was like, damn it, I forgot to get corned beef. Darn it anyway. I don't know. So side note about like when people listen to this, it will not be St. Patrick's Day. However, my daughter woke up this morning and she was like, she told Jim, she's like, Dad, the leprechaun didn't stop by. Well, you know, we forgot that we did all of these fun things with our kids because, you know, 2020 happened and it's been just a rat race. We used to dye the toilet water green to, yes, we're weird. I know who dyes the toilet water green. Some people dye their beer green. We dye the toilet water green. And so he like rushed them off and then he takes the mudroom bathroom. It was like, who didn't flush the toilet? It was green.
Wow. For the win.
Dad for the win. Because Mom was out working out. I wasn't dyeing any toilets any green. Anywho, we can celebrate St. Patty's Day in a way to honor Papa Galvin today. So thank you for bringing your wisdom to everyone. I think this topic, like I've said, is something that is a little bit harder for some folks to talk about. Like, I think we like to talk about sex more than we like to talk about death. However, I just read an article that people like to talk about death more than they like to talk about money.
Wow.
So you, my friend, are moving up.
Slowly but surely, we're getting a cultural foothold.
Sex, death, money. Let's talk about all of those things. No.
And they're so tied. You know, they really are tied together when we talk about planning, especially with our families and how to broach conversations about death and how we plan ahead. You know, the reality is we do need some sort of knowledge about where people are at financially. And that makes it all the harder. You mix two difficult subjects together and people shut down really fast. And so I think figuring out ways to have those conversations either all at once or in bite-sized manageable portions is really important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you bring such a unique approach to the conversations around really just like putting together legal documents. Sometimes people are like, I can just do that on a Post-it note. And I'm like, that is not something I advise or is legal. So, but how do you take this unique approach of looking at it as life planning instead of just estate planning? And maybe we can, you know, then transition into this new age aspect of the death doula work that you do as well, which I love always sharing when I get to, Brenna and I work together very frequently with clients jointly. And one of the many reasons why I love extending my team to you is that you look at it from a life planning aspect and you engage in those emotions that if we were just to ignore from people, we're really ignoring the actual planning that we need to do. So how did you get to that space? How did you come into that love of really working with people?
You know, I always find it fascinating that people are at the heart of what I do and why I do it. If I was just pushing documents around all day, it wouldn't have much meaning to me or in my life. But being able to sit down with people and figure out what makes them tick and why they're choosing and making the decisions that they're making for themselves or others and what's important to them is everything. And I think that when people look at estate planning in particular, they're like, I have to do these documents, right? I have to just sign these few things. You know, somebody told me I need a power of attorney. Somebody told me I need a healthcare directive. Somebody told me I need a will. I focus less on those documents and more about how people want to live while they're alive and the legacies that they want to leave when they die. And that's both financial and it's not just financial, right? It's also how do we want to coordinate an environment of care that's reflective of who you are and what matters to you and who's important to you. And how do we, when we look at what we leave behind, often what's left after our bodies are gone are just the assets, right? But there's also people. And so we need to figure out how we want to care for those people and those organizations or communities that are important to you. And so usually, my conversations, I of course spend lots of time explaining what the legal documents are, but I can figure out what we need to do on the legal end to put that plan together. What's important is to make sure that clients know when we're planning for these stages that they might encounter. And the reality is most of us will. It's rare, unfortunately, that we come out of this life, where we go to sleep one night, we put our head on the pillow and we never wake up. So we go from really healthy and well to the what's next, in that moment. There's usually an in-between, and that in-between, it can be really hard for us individually going through that and family members. So I also think about it as gifts that we leave to our loved ones. Like by doing this planning, if it's not enough to do it for yourself, when you're empowering others or wanting them to be part of your team or your community of care, then we need to make sure that they can do so in a way that is as easy as possible. Because it's really hard for, you've done that, Shannon, you've been walked with your dad through his Alzheimer's diagnosis. And I've walked with my dad through, his terminal cancer diagnosis, and now with my family post-death. And I think that experience just deepens the empathy we have for our clients going through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not, it adds kind of the in-between, the soft stuff where we say we don't always recognize as important unless you've walked with clients or a loved one through every stage of that process. And once you have, you know that the planning is a gift, but also the openness that we can, the conversations that we can have, those are priceless. So I think that it is hard and it's messy, but denying that it's going to happen, it will just create more hurdles for the people that matter to you.
Well, I think you bring up a really good point, and this is a question I've been asked quite frequently as of late, and it's how do we start to have some of these difficult conversations, especially, you and I have worked with generations who really value privacy, right? And we can see the differences from generation to generation. But when we start to talk about money and income and that transition of independence, I think that that's a huge thing that legal documents don't touch on. The aspect of, I said this to my mom in a car ride when she was frustrated with my dad. I had to break it down and say, Mom, can you imagine not being able to tie your shoes anymore and zip up your pants and take a shower and make toast? Mm-hmm. These are things we take for granted every day as fully abled individuals who can execute on those things. And as we age, some of that independence who we were providing for other people for so many years of our lives have now taken steps backward. How do we have those conversations with someone who's maybe a little bit more private than wanting to have those conversations, even though we know that they're necessary?
Yeah. I'm a big fan of using all the resources that we can to help us with this, because it's not a one size fits all approach, depending right. on what sort of family of origin you come from, what's your comfort level with these topics. But, in my experience, usually I talk to clients about well, we can sit down and make a really wonderful plan together and put that in writing and make sure that it's known. You know about it and I know about it. But when something happens, the two of us aren't probably going to be there in the thick of it. And so at that point, it's important that our loved ones know that you've planned. And so I think it's really helpful when people at least notify their kids or their friends or whoever's in their trusted circle and say, you know, I've done this planning. If something happens to me, I've created a file, I've created a drawer that has the information you need, and that'll be where you start. That is bare minimum to me as far as conversation starting. So that's the floor, right? We haven't come close to the ceiling at that point. I also think it's really important that in that file of documents, we also have a little bit of a snapshot of someone's resources or expenses, because I can tell you that when I've helped kids who have been appointed as a power of attorney, usually the first 3 months is just investigation, trying to figure out what the heck has happened, where things are, what income's coming in, where does it get deposited, what's coming out. And they're just trying to play catch up because how you handle your resources every month or your budget every month is different than how I do, which is different than how someone else does it. And that's wonderful. You know, we're all unique. We do things our own way. But if somebody's going to step into your shoes and try to act on your behalf, it's really important that we empower them to do the job well. And so, you know, I think it's good, as well as having the legal documents in one place, to have an overview of your assets, income, and expenses kind of all there. Or if you work with someone who helps you with that, then they can also help your family member with that. And so it may be as simple as, if something happens to me, call Shannon, right? Because Shannon knows where everything's at or what happens on a month-to-month basis. And providing that cookie trail, that's kind of bare minimum. But, you know, the conversations start changing definitely as people progress in their life. And usually that's a combination of age, fragility, physical diagnoses, you know, those things that happen to us as we move through life. You know, typically the closer we are to death, right, whether it's known or unknown, the more we need to have conversations about what we want for our lives, how we want to live them, what type of care preferences we have, be that at home with supportive services, in long-term care. You know, that topic is really something that I find families wait until push comes to shove. Typically there's been an accident. Mom's fallen, she's broken her hip, and now we need to move her because her house isn't safe. That's the call that I get. And frequently, then I'm going back and saying, how does mom feel about this? Have you talked about this? And often the answer's no, because everyone's so panicked and in crisis mode that they haven't slowed down enough to listen to one another and think about what they want and the best way to get there. So, you know, I've had been the mediator of those conversations sometimes, like if the child's having a hard time broaching it with their parent, or the parent is having a hard time talking about things with their kids. Sometimes a third party can do the trick. But I also want to give you resources to have those conversations on your own too, because
yeah, I've gotten a lot of questions from people who are like, the person that did my parents' estate planning documents, we don't even know where they are anymore. We don't have a relationship with them, right? I think is a little bit more unique than the step that you play with your clients, where you're kind of not necessarily an active role in their time from the time but you're a resource that's available for them. And that's something that you and your firm have always worked very hard on being and having available multiple things besides the legal part. Not every firm does that. So how do people start these conversations if they don't have those same level of resources?
Right. And, I think there are a couple of free tools online. If you're having a hard time even knowing what questions to ask, I want to share my kind of tools that I hand out. And one of them is from the Conversation Project, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization that emerged with the idea that to really ensure that we all have the quality of life that we're seeking, it's important that we have conversations, and these conversations are essential. But sometimes we need a guide, a starter kit that points me in the right direction and helps me get my head around my own thoughts before I can talk about them publicly to someone else. And so they have a really great starter kit. If you're just new to this thought process of how we talk through end of life care, values about care, like how much information you want about your medical treatment, how private you are. Do you want to share that with others if you were sick? All of those sorts of things. It kind of takes you through a roadmap. And then they also have a workbook that if you have a diagnosis, it helps you think and conceptualize what you understand that diagnosis to be, what you understand the prognosis to be, and then what your wishes are. Because sometimes course of treatment that's being recommended the goal of that treatment is quantity of life and not quality of life.
Right.
And so I think it helps us because as we have, for example, if you've got someone you love with a cancer diagnosis and the plan is treat, return to health, right? There may be points along the way where that's no longer possible, but the goal of kind of medical treatment is often to extend our life without a lot of discussion in some situations about, well, what does that mean for my days with my family? This might extend my life for 6 months, but during that time, am I going to be able to be with anyone I love? Am I going to be well enough to do the things I enjoy doing? Mm-hmm. So I think the What Matters to Me workbook really helps people and their loved ones who have a diagnosis and they're working through decisions about course of treatment.
Yeah.
And then there's some fun. I don't know if you guys, if you're a family who plays games, you play.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. The Foreman girls love playing games, but we also do as a family too, like extended family when we can get together.
Right. Back in the dark or the light ages or in the dark ages.
Who knows? We'll get out of it some point in time.
Yeah. So one thing that there is something called Go Wish, which is a card game that operates like Go Fish. And it asks questions like, how important is it to you to have friends you love near when you're dying? How important it is for you to not be a burden for your loved ones. And you kind of categorize it from very important to somewhat important to not important. And you organize your thoughts. And what I think is funny about that is that some people, right, who are very fiscally motivated say, if treatment is going to cost money, right, that's that I would not want ongoing treatment if there's going to be a big price tag with that. Some people say, I don't care how much it costs as long as I have good quality of life throughout, right? And it helps people navigate that those prompts and organize it in order of importance. So you can play side by side with someone and organize and kind of pull a card and talk about where it falls in your values or priorities. And similarly, there's something called a death deck, which is less, I would say, it prompts more discussions about, the legacy you want to leave behind, or if you had a celebration of life, what would it look like? How would you want to be celebrated? What are you most proud of? Some of these discussion points about legacy, are prompts in those cards. And I think that sometimes when we can't find the words, we have to look at who can help us, because it is not something that's a common item. I have very few clients who say, I grew up in a house where my mom, since I was, an adult, has given me copies of her legal documents, and has always been very open about the type of care she would want to receive. That's a rarity. And even in those circumstances, I found that even if one person is like that, it's been a pretty one-sided conversation. It's not a, you show me
right.
you want, and let me listen, and I'll also talk about what's important to me. And I think that the other big way that people talk through this stuff as a family is what I would say is the fear factor. What are the fears driving people? What are their concerns about care and dying, and what have they witnessed in their lifetime? Because sometimes those stories, those experiences of, I had a parent who needed skilled care, it was a horrible facility, it didn't take good care of my loved one, those sorts of pain points can really change how people think through what they want throughout their aging process or death and dying process. And so I would say that, there's plenty of tools to help, including just talking about your own family experiences or what you're watching with friends and loved ones.
I think that those are great points to have those conversations in a non-traditional manner that is a little less, I don't know, sometimes it feels invasive to just go straight to it, right? It's like a good place to start. How about for those individuals who are in a situation where the legal documents are done, and maybe it's you or I that now have to step in as the power of attorney, and we have somebody who is a little bit more resistant in that, but we know that they need help. How do we have those conversations with somebody to, just let go of that independence just a little bit so that we can help them, so they don't give up something that maybe, because I think I've ran across a lot of people who are like, how do I have this conversation with my loved one who I have the legal documents for, but can't get them in that space to allow me to help?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few people who sometimes are in it, especially when they're, in my experience, with dementia, early stages, or, sometimes after a loved one has passed and the person who passed away was the primary, money manager in the household. The survivor's having trouble but doesn't want to lose the control or autonomy of driving the process. I think at that point, it is asking about, right now, what are the things that you're struggling with most? Are there things that I can do to help you? I want to make sure that I can step in if you need me to and when you're ready to. And to do that well, I'd like to know where I should start. Should I start with, when's the last time you looked at your documents or talked to Shannon or, did this sort of worked with your professionals. That's a step. Sometimes we can't, in every case, I want to try to involve both parties, and make that an actual give and take at that point. But occasionally we don't have that luxury because the participant is no longer, or the person who has a diagnosis or is sick isn't able to logically understand the losses that they're experiencing. And then often it's the person who's been appointed stepping in and saying, okay, I'm going to come over once a week. You just leave the mail here and I'll go through it with you and help organize it. Or, I'm going to see if I can get copied on these statements that are sent online. I want to be sure that I know what's happening and can support you throughout. And sometimes we can't even include people depending on where they're at. And then it's more of how do we reduce anxiety for them? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that is also comes up a lot with conversations about keys or a move.
Mm-hmm.
Those are incredibly tough to say. It's no longer safe, right, for you to drive anymore. Or, it's really time that we bring in either outside help, or it's really time that we look at a move because it's no longer safe for you here.
Mm-hmm.
Those conversations feel at times impossible for both sides. And that's where I say it's really helpful to have a team to support you. And that's not just legal, financial care. It's also, right, it's also mental health. It's also how do we build this group who can bolster you as you navigate these really tough spaces and messy spaces.
Yeah. And I think too, you and I have had these conversations in supporting each other through our own journeys of having to have these conversations with our parents. And it's very different when it's your loved one and you're giving advice to other people on a regular basis on how these conversations happen too. So it's really nice to have a sounding board. And I think you and I've talked about this too. You bring a great sense up that people always think that it's your financial advisor, your attorney, and your, caregiver, but really how is the caregiver taking care of themselves too? We know especially caregiving comes in mass amount of roles to women historically and of present time, that women we're naturally nurturers. That's just how we've been wired, I say. We've been blessed with that wiring. But, and not that men can't be nurturers, they can, just in a different way. We end up needing to have someone else nurture us through that process too. I know I had to have that conversation with my mom very early on in the care of my dad. And I'm so proud of her now that she has multiple, groups that she meets with, support groups that she meets with, even throughout COVID, because that has been an experience where they actually had to cut off care for my dad coming into the house, and only mom has been his care provider. And I haven't been able to be in that realm to provide, things besides groceries and a FaceTime call, which, it provides its own level of harshness. But the key conversation, the care transition conversation, and the financial conversations are ones that happen frequently. I know for me, I always lean back to my own personal experience. And we know that everything that works for you or I isn't necessarily always going to work in situations. So I encourage people to try multiple things and multiple avenues and ways to be able to have those conversations. But if we look at it from a perspective of, I always tried to put myself in my dad's shoes. How would he want me to talk to him? And for us, when we had the conversation with my dad about the keys to the car, it was actually much easier when we took them away than it is now. Now he wants that independence again. Now he wants to take his bike out for a bike ride.
And he doesn't have the stability and the balance to be able to do that. And so it's almost like that element of just validating what they're saying, right? When we step into a caregiver role, we aren't the one that is in charge of their thought process. And we might be in charge of the logistics, but we have to remember that there is a person behind all of the logistics and there's feelings associated with that. So, I mean, I have always said to my dad, hey, Dad, how would you feel in this situation if you hurt somebody by accidentally hitting them with your car, even though that wasn't your intention, like you didn't mean to do it, but your brain didn't fire on all cylinders to allow you to know that you needed to press your right foot to brake. And we talk about with my dad, like, it's not your fault. Mm-hmm. None of what you're going through is your fault or anything that you did wrong. It's just that your brain isn't working the way you want it to work or we want it to work. And we had to have a conversation a year ago. My dad can't operate zippers anymore. Mm-hmm. And we had to, God loves 2020. It made sweatpants super cool. So it made that conversation really easy with mm-hmm. Dad, because it was like, hey, Dad, look, like I'm wearing pants that don't have zippers. Right. How cool is this? Like you and I can be twins now. Mm-hmm. And so it was just that element again of trying to, and I'm not the one that's there every single day like my mom. And so I think it's important to, how do you share that caregiving responsibility, even if it's partial? Like, do you have a friend? Do you have a sibling? Do you have someone else where you can draw that line of like where and how do you help fill in some of those gaps? Because we can't always do it alone. We're not superheroes.
Right. I think that that's really important, that we look at not only the care receiver, but the caregiver, and we build this team, around them. And I always, it's probably because I was a sports junkie my whole life, but that idea of having a group to fall back on, where they're there to lift you up, when you're not feeling like you can do it alone. Or even when you are resistant, you want to be able to do it. Sometimes I have caregivers who are like, it's my spouse. I want to be sure that there's no one else I'd rather have caring for them. That doesn't mean that all of our needs are being met, as a caregiver. And so it's really important that we figure out who can provide support. And it's not going to look the same. It could be somebody might be dropping off groceries. Somebody might be the comedic relief, on the phone call. Somebody might be the one to, run errands and make sure that they get the coolest, most comfortable joggers, possible. It could be any parts of that. And that could be a group of friends and family members. But then there's also, all of the professionals that you build around you too, who know you well enough so they can catch you when you're falling, or when you are struggling with when is the right time to bring in outside care, or when is the right time to make this decision. They can help guide you and get you there. I recently had a client who I've been working with for the last year. And so this is one thing that's a little different, I think, from my practice than traditional estate planning, where you sign documents and kind of what you've done with an attorney is over. We do something called life care planning, and you referenced it before, where people work with us over a year and not over, for X number of documents that they sign. And when I do that planning, often it's because there's a diagnosis and we need to plan for how are we going to make sure that they have the good, high quality of care they need, B, how are they going to fund or finance that care? And then C, kind of what sort of how do we protect resources when we can for either the caregiver or the kids? How do we make sure that those people that matter to you are cared for in the way that you want them to be? And so there's a legal component to that, there's a financial component to that, and then there's the care component. And so my team has a social worker on staff that helps us with coordination of that care. And when I work with clients like that, often it's because we're the support. So the spouse can focus on the day-to-day stressors, to be honest, of caregiving, the demands of caregiving, make sure that their attention is where it needs to be. And they're not spending hours and hours into the evening after their loved one goes to sleep or is napping about all of the rest. How do I pick an assisted living facility or skilled care? How do I know when is the time to make the move? Am I going to lose all of the wealth that we've built or the retirement that we've saved? There are people who can help answer those questions. So you can focus on what matters and have the quality time and the patience. Your well is deeper because you have someone else taking out buckets of water for you. So you're not trying to handle or hold it all at once.
Because they're both full-time jobs.
Right.
They are quite literally both full-time jobs, and social workers and a staff and a team are the team that help you through all of the paperwork, through all of the benefits that the person you're caring for might be accessible to receive. For me, I share this quite frequently, which is why I'm so passionate about planning ahead. My parents didn't have the resources to plan ahead. Thank goodness we live in a country that has support for them from a financial standpoint, to be able to provide care for my dad if he needs it. And to provide them resources and medical benefits and, Meals on Wheels that are available for them. Although my dad thinks they taste like crap. So he's like, this means more salt and pepper. Okay, Dad. Oh. You can't have hot sauce. That triggers something else for you too. It's that element of really getting back to the human side of things. And I think for a long time in both of our industries, we were processes. We process things. We got things done. Check, check, check. What about the stuff, the gray area in there? You and I were talking about this, prior to hitting record from other things in our lives, but being quiet and not talking about this or being secretive isn't going to serve anyone. As a caregiver, you don't have to own everything. As someone who might need care and you're hesitant to ask for it, it's okay to do that. Like, we live in this society where we have to be all independent all of the time. And I think some of us are starting to realize, no, it's actually really great to have a team and not have to be the independent person all of the time. Now, we've also talked about, we talked a little bit about the life care planning piece of it. What is this role of a death doula, and how did you come about it and discover the true meaning of utilizing that as an additive to your clients too, for that gray area?
So in the work that I do, I was frequently the call, as things started, for lack of a better word, ramping up, be it there's terminal diagnoses, last few days of life. And there was this notable gap in knowledge where people knew their loved ones had done some planning, right? They knew that their parent or spouse had done legal documents, but they felt really anxious about what was happening. And rightfully so. Death is scary. There's a lot we don't know about it. And a lot that changes, there's an old saying that says, death abhors a vacuum. There's really what happens when we have a death is there is a major shift in our family, in our community, and we all struggle to know where we stand in relation to that. And so I think what I realized is that despite the fact that there's many, many services that are so wonderful for people out there, hospice care, long-term care, loved ones who are acting as care providers, often in the final days of life, or even if we go out months before that, when we know there's a death coming, there's not a lot of resources historically about how to navigate those feelings, how to plan for it, and how to make sure that the final days are what we want them to be. So part of the role of a death doula is really an educator and a partner, someone who's going to help you plan in advance. That's kind of stage one of the role of a death doula. And stage two really is someone who's going to act as a care partner, respite, in the last final days, be with you to make sure that the planning, what we've talked about, happens to the best of our ability. There's so much we can't control, but there's a lot we can as far as the environment, right? How, if dying at home is important to you, how do we make sure that, we get that, set that stage in the way you wanted it to be. And then after kind of death, there's the physical, what happens with the body. And then we start the process, or a death doula begins the work of touching on grief and reframing the death. And I think that I was feeling, from my role as strictly an attorney, I was seeing people and we were signing documents. We felt good about them. The family knew about them. We did the subsequent work, but there was just this big hole that people would step into in those last days of life and the weeks that followed. And our brains are cloudy when we're in grief. We're not thinking logically, we're flooded with emotions. And so in that process too, just making sure people have a hand to know, here's where you go. Here's what's important to look at now. Here's what can wait, and help people organize those thoughts and feelings. So my thought about doulas is they're just an incredible resource for families going through end of life, and help you get your kind of physical and metaphorical house in order. They can help you think through what you really want, what's important to you, and then help create meaning in a process that often is kind of been kept, again, private, silent. People are scared to share about their experience or talk about death and dying. And we can't, as the person who is going to be gone, we can't always pass along the lessons learned. Family members, care providers can. And so I think that's really important for us to do.
Yeah. I mean, I remember specifically how you kind of played a part when we were walking through that journey with Jim's grandma. Anytime I'm losing anyone in my life, Brenna's usually the first person that I call. Because you have such a great way of being able to remind me of what are the important things. And the important things aren't always just the medicine that person is receiving or that the legal documents are done. But I remember you asking me, is there a blanket that Jim's grandma really loves? Mm-hmm. And it was something just as simple as that, right? Like, is there something that is going to provide her a feeling of home, even though she's in a hospital room?
and can't be at home right now because we can't move her home, right? And that isn't an option. Or I remember when my grandfather was passing away, and it was the act of dying isn't something that just happens in one day, right? I think we have to, for those people that haven't actively been involved in being with someone while they're actively dying, it is a process that happens over a period of time. And we filled the house with my grandfather's favorite music. We cooked, we were there. I remember somebody asking me why I let my 18-month-old walk around and touch him as he's laying in his hospital bed and can't really talk. And I said, because he knows she's here. And like, why would I act any different just because he can't tell me he knows she's there? And so, and what a great memory for her. She actually still talks about remembering her G-Pa, her great grandfather. And she was 18 months. She doesn't even, but she remembers that image. And so I think, and then I remember my aunts and uncles and everybody being there and all sharing stories and what that memory is. And not every family can have that. And let me just be frank and honest, our family has not really ever had those types of memories. There's usually somebody telling somebody what to do or, different things like that. But, remembering what that person wants, I think is ultimately the goal as we move through these difficult conversations, whether it be while we're initiating the process or fulfilling the process.
Yeah, I think death is it's a really sacred event in our lives, and we celebrate so many monumentous events in our lives, right? And death, doesn't come with that same lead up often. There's not the same planning that we do for, say, retirement or getting married or going to college. There's and that's because for some people, that's not a hopeful, they don't know what is after death, and that can cause them a lot of anxiety about the dying process. And some of it's related to who they leave behind, fears for them. And so the more we can plan and kind of recognize the sacredness of death in a life cycle, and that understand that it's a component of the life cycle, I think the better experiences we can have related to it. And, I think having just been through this, I think the training that I had to become a death doula really helped me as an individual going through the changes with my dad and the loss that we just had as a family. And, it wasn't formal, like, Dad, we're working on a legacy project right now. What gives your life meaning? I'm going to write it down and bind it in a book and, deliver this to you. But it was through a series of small things that we talked about in the final weeks of his life. It was through us talking about, well, what are the important things we need to put in your obituary? Like, what's important about the life you live? What are you most proud of? And those are not conversations that I had had with my dad before about, or when we spoke about, his celebration of life and like what we wanted to do. COVID impacted our ability to do some components of that. But, when we talked about actually cremation or burial or what happens to his physical body after death, he did have opinions, none that he was eager to share prior to a need to share them, right? But he had feelings about what happened to his body after death. And speaking of kids' involvement with that, my nephews throughout that process after he died, we had the opportunity to kind of be with his physical body one more time before he was cremated. And that was an important thing that we wanted, because in the day he passed, we had some time after he died, to just be with his body and make sure his body was washed. And we had a hospice nurse there to help us wash the body. And then we called the funeral home eventually, and that came a couple hours later after. So I'm saying, the timeline, we had some time, but we wanted to see him one more time. And we offered my nephews, who ranged from 13 to 5, to participate, to go see their granddad one more time. And it gave them that choice. And 2 of the 3 wanted to. And I am more comfortable with death than many. So I'm touching my dad's physical body. I'm holding his hands, feeling his fingers one more time, feeling the side of his face. And I look at my youngest nephew and I say, do you want to touch granddad? It's okay if you want to touch him. And he goes, oh, I already have. There were holes in the container, because he was about to be cremated, that he had put and explored and felt it. And he goes, he's pretty cold. I think I'm good, and he had that chance. And you realize, oh gosh, of course he's curious. Of course he'd want to touch his granddad, because he always did. We have a very physically affectionate family. And so, of course, that experience for him would be important, but also kind of as closure for him to say, this is, different than when he was with us present, when he was alive, and mark that in some way. I think we've hidden death from kids a lot out of fear are we traumatizing them? And I think worse is often just denying its existence, and then having someone so important to you disappear and not understanding the hows or the whys. So, I think it is a generational conversation. It's something that we generationally need to participate in as part of our legacy.
Oh, that's just so beautiful. Brenna, thank you for sharing that story about your dad. I know how much he means to you, and how, having been through that process with you, I know how we can deal with these things every day in our lives. And it touches us in a different way when it's someone close to us. And it also gives us the keys to be able to share with, someone as innocent as your nephew, who now will have that great experience where he wasn't sheltered from something. And I think that was the same I wanted to give my daughter when I did it. And the same, the girls were in the hospital room when Jim's grandma was passing away, and we were there every single day, and I put him up in the bed with her. I think that we don't realize how much that means to the person who can feel that presence too. And I think these are great avenues for us to be able to think about, how do we start these conversations rather than waiting until the last part. I have participated in this long goodbye with my dad for the last 6 years, and many more to come, because he's a damn trooper, and he is sticking around. That's for sure. But I've had these conversations, and I remember I didn't change the relationship with my dad. It's been hard for me because there are pieces. He was my best friend, much like your dad. Like, they were those people that we would call and have those conversations when crap just wasn't going right. And like, what are we supposed to do? Or, some stupid boy broke our heart, and we'd call dad and be like, is it still going to happen? Am I still going to find that person? Right. Or for me, Dad, I had too many drinks. I'm going to need you to come pick me up at the bar. That was a St. Patty's Day a few years, before my kids, but so more than 8 years ago, let's be honest. I am not as young as I still feel. But, I think
it gives us those elements to have those continued conversations while somebody is still alive. So cherishing that time. And we can say that having walked these two very different experiences, yet similar. However, I think until you actually are in it, it's really hard to listen to that advice of don't take it, take advantage of the fact that you can't say those words or have that conversation around legacy or what are you most proud of? Like, what are the things? Much like your dad, my dad is very affectionate as well. He actually does talk about those things. And it's been interesting that he actually gets caught up on it. Like, what is the legacy that he wants to leave? And I remind my clients of that too, because I think there are parts of my dad that feels like he hasn't lived his life to the fullest and now can't. And I think that's a great reminder to us to live each day like it were not promised tomorrow. We can death it.
I just nothing I guess makes me more tender talking about our experiences with caregiving and also end of life and going through death and transition. It's I think it is a really tender time, and it also breaks our hearts wide open to the possibility of and the reminders that love is infinite and we can do things to really fill our lives and the people we love, their lives, and in ways that are meaningful to us. So
today we won't dye the toilet water green. We'll dye the beer green, and we'll cheers virtually later today to Papa Galvin and celebrate just the full circle that we've been able to experience, and each other, and the support that we've been able to give each other as a team, as teammates, I say. But thank you, Brenna, for sharing your wisdom and your heart with us today. Because as I tell you very frequently, and if you ever need the reminder, your heart is gold and you are just so precious and you do such great work. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
Well, thanks, Jenny. Thanks for sharing your audience with me. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.